Greetings and welcome. My name is Jake Rayson. I'm a forest gardener and forest garden designer, and this is part 2 of the live stream of my online course, Create a Backyard Forest. Today we're looking at planning a backyard forest. So, the notes are always available online, forestgarden.wales/course/plan. Why plans are useful, and the whole idea of the planning process. Why would you bother creating a plan in the first place? Why not just let things grow or plant things at random? So yeah, and it's looking at the planning process too, and the different stages of the planning process, and then how that relates to the design process. Secondly, we'll look at creating a map, and this can be a paper map or a digital map, or kind of combination of both. Then we'll be looking at which observations to record. So when you start the whole process, the initial step is to do a survey of your land, of your situation, and we'll look at all the different elements to all the different observations that you can record. It's quite a long list, but it's thorough. But yeah, we'll go through all of them. And then finally, I round up with measuring techniques. There's 4 techniques, old school techniques for measuring, and then what you do is you then add those measurements to your map and then refine your map. I hope this order makes sense. I've got the order down here as well. You can see, that along the bottom. Let me know if it doesn't make sense, and I'll have a think about it and possibly shuffle things around. Okay, let's get cracking then. So why plans are useful. This is an image of the ornamental forest garden, and one of the first things that I did was to make a survey of the what's already there. This is all the trees along the back. I don't know if you can see that. So seeing what is already there in your garden and documenting what's there. Secondly, you've got to be clear about what you want. This is the wish list. This is the wish list part of the process. So you are saying, you write down the things that you want and what do you want your garden to be. And this is probably the most exciting part, because this is exciting because this is you're using your imagination, and you're kind of have a vision and an idea of, great, we could do it like this, and you're not bound by any kind of practicalities at this stage. So this is the fun bit. And then once you've done that, you actually you then map the land. You create a map of the land. You put the observations onto the map, and then you kind of integrate your wish lists into the map as well, and see how you can do things and whether things are practical or not. And then finally, you distill the plan and the map into a series of practical, concrete actions that you can do. And you break it down step by step and say, right, if I want to have a wildlife pond, where does it go? We know where it goes. What do I actually have to do to get there for the wildlife pond? What is the work that I have to do for it? Like digging a hole, getting a pond liner, making it level, getting plants in, etc., etc. So this is the kind of the practical side of the planning, and the other side of the design process. So I've broken it down, and again, I'm thinking about rewriting this. Oopsie, that's all my stuff coming up. I've broken it down to plan, design, plan, but possibly it should be plan, design, to-do list or something. Because really it's the first bit is your surveying, your wish list, and then creating a map. Those are the kind of planning things. This is like the kind of figuring out what's there and what you want. The design process is moving things around until they're in the right place. And then the other side of that is the other plan, which is why I might change the name of it, is suggestions will be welcome. This has been in the back of my mind. Plan or to-do list or a schedule or something like that, schedule of work, or I don't know what you'd call it, but you get the idea. Question mark. So yeah, do excuse the pauses in between the bits that I'm talking about, because this is me writing ideas down. So yeah, it's kind of 3 stages: plan, design, plan, and we'll get onto the first bit. Observations. Oh, I should have got it wrong way around. Okay, cool. So I have put it the wrong way round. This should be the sections, excuse me. The sections really ought to be plan, observations, map, measure. Because that makes way more sense. This fits in with the 3 different stages. Okay, so what is design? And design, really, this is the kind of the design is the is the kind of the process, a stage after the planning stage. Design is when you put things in the right place. You purposefully put things in the right place, and it sounds kind of, design can sound very fancy, and you can get very kind of tricky about it, but it's actually quite a straightforward process. The design process, like here in this example here, you have a giant sequoia right next to a back door, and that's a bad place to put a giant tree. Just want to point that out for anyone who doesn't realise that. They had to take the tree down, unfortunately, apparently. It's somewhere in Australia. And some situations like that, it's obvious where the right place is, but there's always some situations it's not obvious. And very often what you will find in design is that it's a balancing act. You have various things that you want. So you might want a wildlife pond, which I kind of recommend for all gardens, and you'd like a greenhouse. They both kind of need full sun or lots of sun. So which one goes where? And this is the design process, is balancing a lot of the elements in the garden. So this is the tricky bit, and it's different for every garden. It's different for every space, but it's also different depending upon what people want and who it is and where they are, and a whole range of different factors. So this is the kind of nuanced side of design. And a critical thing, this is Dan's map, by the way, I love it. It's Dan's paper map, and the whole idea is to make the big mistakes early. That it's easier to move symbols around on a map, like this circles here represent trees, and it's easier to move them than it is to move trees. So you try out different positions on a map, and that means that you can figure out fairly quickly where a good place or a bad place for a tree is, and you don't have to plant it and then dig it up and move it later on. So you're making the big mistakes early, and then it's easier to do that on paper than it is to do it in real life. What you can do is to get some bamboo canes and draw circles and go out in the garden and then try out the position of trees in different places. But this is actually that takes quite a lot of time, and then you've got to go back and you've got to move things around. It's actually an awful lot easier to move things on paper, so you can see from the position on the paper whether it'll work or not, and then you can fine tune it outside and try out a couple of different ideas outside. But like, make the big mistakes early, make the big mistakes on paper. I'll write that down as well. Early. Cool. And then, because with a forest garden, the whole, for me, this is the whole point of a forest garden, is that you're creating an ecosystem that happens to be edible. So You are working with nature to grow edible crops, but if you're working with nature, that means you have to design for nature. Nature is not an add-on, nature is an integral part of the process. So you design wildlife features at the beginning. You design it as part of the whole lot. You don't go, oh, well, yeah, we'll chuck in a couple of bee hotels and a bird table, and that's our nod towards nature. It informs every step of the process. Design from beginning. Integral. Part design. Sorry about the pauses. Okay, and then another thing to bear in mind as well is that if you're creating a plan, you're creating it for communication, really, and you're communicating. It's critical if you're working with other people. So I have a design job that I'm getting back to in September, and I've created a plan for it, a plan of action, a list of stuff. And it's communicating to the client, but it's also communicating to the builders as well what needs to be done, when it needs to be done. So it's invaluable for communicating to others, but also it's invaluable for yourself. And by writing everything down, you are throwing everything on the table. You're seeing what you've got. Then you're much more aware of the different features. And I think what happens is they think, oh yes, I know what I want, and I know what's there, and then you look, and then you think, and then you observe, and you realise that you don't. There's a massive concrete plinth, which is what I found actually, a massive concrete plinth somewhere, and you totally didn't see it, and then you just found it, and that's where a plant was going to go, but it's not going to be a plant there anymore because it's massive and it's concrete. So yeah, it's a really good part of the process, and it's also good for when you do write it down, you have it as a record, so that later on in the process you go, what was I thinking about when I did this here? And you go, oh yes, that makes sense, because it's for your future self, and your future self will thank you for writing it all down and being clear about what it is that what your ideas were. So create a map. Observations. Actually, I should go straight to observations. Or shall I go to? No, I'll go to create a map and then observations. Yeah, I'll do it that way around. I'm wondering whether to do the map first and then to do the observations. Okay. Let's do the map first. Right. So this is a satellite photo. This is a map I did for a client a few months ago. Small forest garden in Northamptonshire, and kind of illustrates the using a satellite photograph as a background. It's what I generally do now when I'm working particularly with remote clients. And I think it's key to point out that the map is not the territory, that the whole point of creating a forest garden is not to make a nice map. The whole point of creating a forest garden is to create a forest garden. So don't get too hung up on the map. I make nice maps because I deal a lot with other people, but for your own purposes, it's not, you've got to bear in mind the function of what a map is doing. The map is not the garden. Concentrate on the garden, and it's a tool to help you create a better garden. So what you're actually doing with the map is, firstly, you're marking important features. You're adding observations. So I can write this down. Functions of map. Add observations. So you're marking the important features of the observations that you're making, where the telegraph poles are and the telephone lines, and etc. And then, kind of really importantly, you're trying out the different positions. You're moving things around on the map to try them out in different positions on the property. So you're trying different positions for trees. And finally, it's worth bearing in mind, it can be a paper map. It doesn't have to be a computer-based map, or it can be an online map. What I I think we might script. Sorry about this. What I kind of recommend to people is if they're not particularly computer savvy, is to create a paper map, and I'll create. I've got to do some more work on this actually. How to create a paper map, because I kind of talk about a paper map, but I don't really talk about the I need to show a bit more detail on that. So if you're not that computer savvy, I'd say kind of create a paper map, and one of the best ways of doing this is to use a screenshot of either a satellite photograph or ordnance survey data, which I will show you. There's a place, I'll find it for you actually. There's a place called ground stability, and it enables you, I'll put this in the chat for you. OS maps online. And this enables you to see an ordnance survey map, so it saves you having to buy one or get one from a photocopy it and trace it. You can get it straight from a website. And then what I would be really tempted to do is to take something like that, and then I would print it out and then use that as the basis, because what I have found hardest about creating a paper map is that is all the angles. It's if you've got a rough outline of what the garden looks like, it's a lot easier to measure stuff and then to kind of shift the angles around afterwards. So I kind of use it as a basis. So paper map. I'll write that down. Our examples creating paper map. Okay, so ground stability and OS map. Okay, and then using alternatively, you can use a satellite photograph and print that out and then trace over the top of a satellite photograph. Now that's for a paper map. So if you're not that computer savvy, I will create some additional videos which kind of walk through step by step for this process. For a couple of different options. And then there is some online maps. Now there's one called Scribble Maps, which I'll post into the chat. Now Scribble Maps online service. I'm sure there's more than one. And what this does is use Google Maps, and then you can add features on top of it using a kind of in your web browser. And I've looked at it. It looks kind of interesting. For me, I use CAD all the time, so I just use a satellite photograph, and then I draw my CAD package. Bring the satellite photograph into my CAD package, and then take physical measurements and create a map, kind of based around a satellite photograph as a guide, but then actually using physical measurements. So I don't really use the online services, but it's worth investigating. It's much easier to use than CAD, so that's worth a look. And if you are computer savvy and you're prepared to put some work in, you do have to ask yourself whether it's worth it, because I'm always doing maps, I'm always creating plans. It's kind of that's what I do for a living, so it's worth my while learning it. But it did take me a couple of weeks to kind of get it off the ground, to be able to understand how to do stuff. So it is a steep learning curve. And if you've just got one garden, you're just interested in doing your one garden, it might not be worth you learning CAD. Okay, so yeah, possibly, but have a think. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So paper maps. The key thing with all maps actually, but particularly with paper maps, is to work out your scale. And this is the scale of a map. I thought I had notes on this. The scale of your map is how it relates to the physical map. So you scale. Obviously, it's a scaled down version. Otherwise, your map would be the same size as your garden, which is nonsense. So You scale it down to get it to fit, but it's the ratio by which you scale it down from the real thing, and that's the scale. I'll just give you a rough idea. You can see on the map. Oh, let me get this up here. So, 1 to 100 means in a scale. Just to give you an idea. 1 to 100 means that 1 meter will equal 1 centimeter. And I'll say this clearly because I am pretty rubbish with numbers, and I'm always getting them mixed up and confused. But 1 to 100 is 1 meter to 1 centimeter. Okay. The 1 to 50 is 1 meter to 2 centimeters. Now, if the average garden, according to the Sun newspaper, I don't think I read the Sun newspaper ever, but apparently it's 16 meters by 5 meters. And at a 1 to 50 scale, that 60 meters is 32 centimeters, and then at the 5 meters it becomes 10 centimeters. So it's that's roughly it. So just a little bit too big for an A4. What I do use for when I do paper plans, I use 5mm, which you can see here, 5mm squared. I find it much easier to use than graph paper. And what I would recommend doing is, if you can, use A3 paper, and then it's bigger. And then when you print out, if you're using an Ordnance Survey map or you're using a satellite photograph, I'd kind of be really tempted to persevere and print out on an A3 piece of paper and then use that as a basis. Print out on A3 and then use that as a basis and trace it onto your paper map, and then use that as a basis for your paper map. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. I will get some practical examples, because it's all very well talking about it with slides, but it's totally another thing to do it. So I will do companion videos of walkthroughs. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do on the paper map, and then we'll move on to the CAD map. Now this is, yeah. This gets a little bit technical. I'll go through it fairly quickly, but this gets a little bit on the old technical side. It's for those people who are confident in using CAD, and I just want to kind of talk through how you set up using a satellite screenshot. The key thing to remember though with CAD is you don't have to get into the intricacies of it. There's so much you can do with a CAD program. It's quite bonkers, really. It's really an amazing bit of kit. But the only thing we're really, for a forest garden, the kind of key things are the boundary of the garden and the trees, and it's like the big trees really, and smaller shrubs, fine, you can move them around, they're easier to move, but it's the big trees and the boundary, those are the elements that you really want to be playing around with. And then squares for a greenhouse, and a circle for a pond or something. But that's it. It's not like super high tech CAD work that you'd be doing. So I'm going to go through creating using a satellite photograph as a background image for a CAD map. The first thing to do is take a satellite screenshot. You can use, I'll go on to that. Secondly, working out the meters per pixel, and then thirdly, importing the image into QCAD. So first off, satellite screenshot. Use the highest resolution that you can. Zoom right in. So this is a friend's house, a client's house in North London. Be sure to include the scale in meters, and that scale's down here. Okay, so make sure you include that in the screenshot, and then save it as a good quality JPEG, because it will save a bit of size. Excuse me. Okay. There are a variety of different satellite photographs you can get. There's Google Maps, Bing Maps, Bing.com Maps, and Apple Maps are the three main ones. The resolution, the quality varies a lot between vendors, and it varies a lot between the areas that you're in. In the UK, I know that Cardiff does actually have Cardiff has got kind of good coverage. London, kind of main urban conurbations. But out in the country, it's less. There's less resolution. So look at different options. I must say though, it's brilliant fun because if you're in a city, you get these amazing kind of 3D fly-throughs. You can just kind of zoom around in a map. It is bonkers, and it's actually really, really useful. There's a chap in Cardiff who's very kindly said he would let me use his property as an example, and it's brilliant just to be able to see the house in the context that it is in 3D, a place you haven't been to. And even for people, actually, I'll put this in the notes as well. Apple Maps 3D, even for your own property, to be honest, because you can see where stuff is 3D in Apple Maps and Google Maps. Not sure about Bing Maps, actually. Very cool. There we go. Right then, so first of all, we take a screenshot. So we get the map up in the map is up, and then we take a screenshot of it and save it into the onto the computer. Now once we've done that, we open it up in Photoshop. So I use Photoshop. I've used it for years, but you can use any bitmap editor. There are an awful lot of good bitmap editors. I'll add bitmap editors. Oh, I will have two. If you need a bitmap editor, let me have a look for it for you. Alternative to, I'll just quickly do this because this is actually very good. Photoshop. There's a website called called Alternative to, and it is really, really good. Really, really, really good. Find alternatives. Photoshop is a bitmap editor, so you've got an image or a photograph, okay, as opposed to something like CAD, which uses vectors, so it uses lines. So I pop that into the chat. So open up your image in Photoshop or something similar, and then measure the pixel length of the meters scale. So yeah, do check that you've got meters rather than yards for this. It's much easier to work in meters. All kind of modern people generally work in meters now. So use the marquee tool, and then you select the scale. Make sure you get it right. That 5 meters is 106 pixels. So 5 meters divided by 106 pixels gives you the meters per pixel, which in this instance is 0.047, etc. And that is the number that we'll use to scale in CAD. Now the reason for this is that CAD programs, QCAD for sure, not sure about other CAD programs, but when they import an image, it's imported at 1 pixel per meter. So we just need to scale it down so that it's at the right size. And go into CAD. I'll just zoom through this. File import. So import the image. Once the image is in, select and then select all. And then we've got the image selected. Bring up the property editor. And this gives the properties of the image, and you can see here it's got width factor. You probably can't see it actually in Twitch. It's got the width factor, and then you paste in that number 0.04717, and then you've got the height factor, and it squishes it, and you've got the height factor, and it squishes it down, and that's it. So that is now the basis of your CAD map, and that's really cool because now what you can do is I should show a screen here actually. Okay, show screen, creating trees. So now what you can do is create a circle and say it's it's an Apple MM106 is the only rootstock that comes to mind. That's 4 meters diameter. So you create a circle in CAD. You say diameter 4 meters, and then you can put it onto your garden. There we go, fantastic. That's it. And then I really would say just use that as the basis for it. If you're not, just use a CAD map just for that purpose, for kind of moving around the big things. You could, yeah. Okay. So next up, observations. So now you've got your map. Now, I'm just kind of toying with the idea of whether it's a good idea to create the map first and then do the observations, or whether you're better off doing the observations and then creating a map. I don't know, jury's out. It doesn't really matter. So this is the critical part. So this is a really, really good part, the beginning bit of the whole kind of plan process. This is the first kind of steps in the planning. You're going to make observations of what you've got. So this is all about what you've got. I have made a checklist for this, so it's just a list of stuff really, and it's got some blank boxes that you can fill in, and you can download the checklist from the slideshow, or you can download the checklist from this URL here. Oh my god, I've gone over already. And then so survey checklist, features checklist, wish list, and a plants wish list. So first of all, survey observations. I've got to get a bit of a move on because there might be people waiting in Zoom. So survey observations, position. Position is the aspect of your garden where it is in relation to the points of the compass, where the sun rises, where the sun sets. Elements is the earth and the water and the sun and the climate and the wind. Features is the existing features that are there, like existing buildings and paths and utilities. And then situation is whereabouts the property in the garden sit in relation to the landscape and to other people. So first of all, position. Orientation. I should change that to orientation or aspect. Orientation is basically where it sits in relation to the points of the compass. For me, south is that way. So sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and then its full sun is due south. In the winter, the sun rises over there and sets over there. But in the summer, the sun rises over there and sets over there, and the sun is higher, has a higher arc in the sky. So orientation is actually really, really good to figure out for your garden, because this will determine how much light your garden gets and where the garden gets the light, and this will determine which plants you use. Okay, so figure that out. The elevation, this is a website called GPS Coordinates. There's links in the notes. And then you can work out the elevation of your property. We're 110 meters above sea level, which is quite a lot actually. But there we go. And then this has an impact on on the temperatures and the kind of overall climate. And then the slope. So this is a screenshot. You can just about see an orange line. I might use PGI slope image. The slope, how steep the land is, really determines how much sunlight you get and where the water will flow. And the steeper some land is, generally the drier it is as well, because the water runs straight off. If you have a south-facing property, you have a steep slope, then you're going to get more sun will hit a sloping property than non-sloping property. So south sloping gets more sun, whereas a north slope gets considerably less sun. Yep. So this has again a big impact on how much light you get, how much warmth you get, what plants you grow. To get the maps, you go to bing.com maps, and then there is an option like under the satellite or the satellite button, but there's an option to bring up Ordnance Survey, so you can get the contour lines from there as well to get an idea of the different contours on your property. You can also you can do a survey as well using something. For larger properties, you could do a survey using something called a bunyip. Possibly add bunyip. So if you've got a larger land, then you can do this. Now, there's so much to talk about really, but with a larger property, I would say I used to think, well, I'm in West Wales, it rains, I'm not too fussed about kind of keeping water in and keeping the water on the land, so I don't really need to create any swales and ditches and stuff. But actually, what you find is we had 2 months without rain here in April and May, which is unheard of, and so actually it is a good idea to figure out the contours and possibly do a physical survey to help you work out the best position for creating swales. So that's for larger land. Physical survey, create swales. Okay, water. Oh, I just realised I've missed off a whole section. Oh, rubbish. Anyway, God, I'm running out of bloody time. So anyway, get a move on. Elements, water. Work out where the water is, where the dampest parts of your land is, where the springs are, where streams are, etc., and what time of year they're there too. So it's always a good idea for your observations to give a bit of time, not to do everything all at the same time and try and get everything planted up, is to observe for a year, which is fine because that's part of the process of creating a garden, is that you observe and see what's going on before making kind of major decisions. Earth, figure out the pH of your soil, and then figure out the which is the acidity, which you can get done with a home kit or a test, or you can send off for a test to get it done. And also the soil type, whether it's clay, sand or loam. You can use a sausage test, which is where you make the soil damp and roll it, and if it's clay it makes a sausage easily. If it's loam, you do make a sausage, but it's a bit crumbly, and if you can't make a sausage at all, then that's sand. That's a very basic test. There's also a jam jar test, which you can find online. I might make a video. Hold on, I'm going to make another video. Make video, jam jar test, make video, sausage test. And then look at the nutrients as well, and so with the soil, so I go back to the acidity. With the pH of the soil, the more acid it is, the further away from neutral the soil is, the less the range of plants that you can grow. Now, some plants, like blueberries, like acid soil. Potatoes prefer a slightly acid soil. So it's all kind of, it depends on the plant, but generally you get a wider range of plants will grow around neutral than acid or alkaline. So you can change the acidity of your soil, but it's quite an involved process. I won't go into it here, but you can do is to get a soil test to find out your soil nutrients, and that's nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and these are the kind of key nutrients that are required by plants for functioning. With a more acid soil and a more alkaline soil, some plants can't absorb these nutrients, which is why the plants don't do so well there. So what I found the cheapest way of doing this is to ask the local farmers co-op to test for nutrients, and it's a cheap way of doing it. We're a bit low. We're low on phosphorus. Really, we're okay for nitrogen and potassium, but we're a bit low on phosphorus. So I've been sprinkling wood ash around the place. There we go. So soil, wind, fantastic. Oh, brilliant. The wind maps, they're fantastic. Meteo Blue, I'll copy the link. This is in the notes. There's a brilliant website, and you can get all sorts of really, really exciting things. Oops, sound okay here? Okay. Map first, cool. Thank you, Pam. Right, wind. Oh, there's a brilliant. They are fantastic. There's maps that you can get for wind, which is this one here, and there's maps. There's a wind. Not a calendar, but it's a circle for a particular location, and it shows you where the most of the wind comes from. And this is the critical thing, really, is your prevailing wind directions. Here in West Wales, we generally get a westerly wind in the summer, and the autumn and the winter tends to be like an easterly northeasterly wind. It's generally, and that's generally what it tends to be. Wind maps. Oh, I can't remember the name of it, but it's brilliant. It's brilliant. So, and then sun. Oh, Sun Surveyor, honestly, amazing application. This is for calculating the angle of the sun in the sky, and it's really, really good because it shows you across different times of the year as well. So what you do is you say you've got a row of trees, and you say, oh, at 1 o'clock, at 2 o'clock, well, no, it's going to be just about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, it'll go behind the sun will go behind the trees, and therefore this particular spot here won't get so much light. So this is the kind of plants I need to think about to go in a particular spot. So it's really, really useful for that, for being able to work out roughly how much light a particular spot will get and what plants will work well there. But the genius side of it as well is that it tells you you can figure out across the year where the sun will be. So like December, the winter solstice, where the lowest points of the sun in the year, and then in the summer solstice, the highest points of the year. So across the year, you can work out different light levels too. So really kind of amazing bit of kit. Sunsurveyor.com. I'll write that down, and you can get it on any phone, well, Android or iOS. And then finally, climate, Met Office. So you can get climate data from the Met Office, which is kind of useful. Yeah, do bear in mind that it's all changing as well because of climate change. I've gone massively over, but bollocks to it. I will just keep on going. I'm gonna have to keep on going with this because, yeah, I'll come on to the Zoom bit in a little while. So features, existing features, we're going to look at now, and plants. Make a note of all the existing plants. So it's a lot of bother to move stuff and removes things, so, particularly trees. So you kind of want to work with what you've got. Also, existing plants will let you know. Existing plants will let you know what other plants will grow well there. So they give you an idea. So for example, we've got some Nepalese raspberry, and I've noted that the creeping buttercup likes the same conditions as the Nepalese raspberry. It likes, part shade, rich damp soil, and it seems to be doing much better. That's for the creeping buttercup and for the Nepalese raspberry. So that's make a note of the existing plants and then plant something similar. Utilities. Oh, crikey. So think about overhead, so electricity pylons, electricity lines, or depends if you've got overhead cables, telephone lines. Don't plant trees underneath. Over in the forest garden, I've got a rowan tree which grows to 15 metres tall, and that's directly underneath the telephone line, which is 12 metres tall. So I really ought to move it now when it's small. Drains, don't plant trees on top of drains and sewage pipes. And water, make a note of where your water pipes are too, for the same reason. But if you're digging or planting stuff, and then also if you do have any water put in, if you have any kind of water infrastructure put in, put that down on the map as well. We've got a pump in the well here, and then I've made a note on the map where the pipes are, so I know exactly where the pipes are. Conflicting advice about this. Someone said, put the pipes in the path, and then someone else has said, put the pipes by the fence. Don't know. So anyway, gas pipes, there we go. Structures, old structures, and also look at structures which were there, might not be there anymore. So old greenhouses, and look at the foundations. Now do be aware that there'll be like old rubbish tips and things like that will have an effect on the quality of the soil. So, and also kind of things like car parking too, they can have an effect on the soil. And access, right, Brighton, so I'm going to make another note. Brighton. Now, access is kind of critical. Now, access is kind of critical. Right, Brighton. 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 Bri where the doors are, the gates, where people are coming and going, alleys out the back, all that kind of thing, and where cars are parked. Can you get stuff in? Can you get stuff out? Do you want to stop people getting in a particular spot? So all these, access is really kind of an important thing about them. That's our access for vehicles, access for people, access for wildlife. Things like hedgehogs have a large area, and you have a little hole in the bottom of a fence, allows hedgehogs to kind of go between gardens. And public rights of way, again, bing.com maps, that has the Ordnance Survey information on it, and that will give you information about public rights of way. Access, cool. I've just realised I've lost a lot off. So, and then finally, situation, privacy. So, what property? This is the property in Cardiff, actually. So you can see what house overlooks the garden, and from which side, and what the angle is. So that's kind of interesting. And then noise. Whoops. So cool. So where the noise is coming from. So here there's a railway track going past, and there's some things you can do with the garden to disguise noise. For traffic noise, water is actually a really good running water is a really good way of getting rid of masking traffic noise. Just has it ticking over in the background, and you're distracted from it. Noise and smell. So here in West Wales, there is a lot of slurry pumped onto the fields, and so think about that, where stuff is, where you don't want to really put a seating area right next to a slurry tank. Okay, so those are your survey observations. Now onto the wish list of features. What I would say, because I've written it down in the notes, is so what I would say is that you want to have wildlife features. When I was talking before about on the planning process, that you want to have wildlife features designed in there from the beginning. Now, for me, the really key wildlife features are a pond, any kind of water. It can be a really small pond, honestly. You've got a small garden, that's absolutely fine, have a small pond. There's a chap called Jules Howard. Oh, that's a point. Oh yeah, I should get these books out. There's a chap called Jules Howard who's got a book called, I don't know if I can see this. He's got a book called Wildlife Pond Book. Create your own pond paradise for wildlife, which is really good, real kind of good basic introduction to creating a pond. And he's created a pond. He had a podcast all about the miniature pond that he created. So pond, number one, and then secondly, oh good lord, sorry, using native plants, because native plants have co-evolved with wildlife. Thirdly, mature trees and shrubs and ground cover, so really kind of perennial shrubs, mature perennial plants. So you're providing ground cover and protection for wildlife. And then finally was a log pile, really because it's so easy to do. You get some logs, and then you put them in a pile, and then you let that's it. You let nature run its course, and they all decompose, and you get all sorts of interesting bugs and amphibians and stuff in there. So those are my kind of top four wildlife features. And I would also say water conservation. This kind of comes back to the idea of with climate change, we really need to be thinking about using water more efficiently. We ran out of water here in West Wales at the end of May, and that's never happened before. So now, seriously, we're going to be creating different water reservoirs, a pond, an additional pond for water, and a rainwater container. So do consider putting these in. It's kind of interesting. Okay, I've got some missing stuff. Cool. And then finally, a nutrient budget as well. And a nutrient budget is It's in Martin Crawford's book, in chapter 6 of Martin Crawford's Creating a Forest Garden book. Do that at the beginning, okay? A nutrient budget really is just to say, making sure that the plants which are supplying the fertility for a garden is making sure that you've got enough of them to feed the trees and the shrubs that you've got, the fruiting trees and the shrubs that you've got. So that will be things like comfrey for potassium and nitrogen fixing shrubs, so members of the pea family like broom and autumn olive, any member of the alder family, sea buckthorn, so a range of nitrogen fixing plants as well. But you want the plants to supply the fertility, so make sure you design those plants in as well. And then other features too that you want to be looking at, well, that you can consider: a polytunnel greenhouse. Where is polytunnel in the greenhouse? And I would say coal frames. Pam mentioned on here. Pam is on here now. Mentioned using coal frames. Coal frames are actually really, really good. Very kind of intermediate stage between having a propagation bed and then a polytunnel. You have and outside you actually have a coal frame, and a coal frame is a nice kind of nice environment for plants, and in between sort of environment before going outside. Add coal frames as well. Blimey, I do feel like I'm juggling. What other things? Oh, polytunnel greenhouse for growing warmer plants like tomatoes and aubergines and chilies if you want annuals, and annual vegetable beds too for potatoes, courgettes, annual beans. And what you can do as well, you can always migrate these over to more perennial vegetables, which is what I'm doing here now. I've kind of got some interesting plants on the go. I won't talk about them, otherwise I'll never finish. And then plants, make a wish list of all your plants that you want. What I did with creating a forest garden was I went through. It's got loads and loads of plants in here. Such a good reference book. I went through and I made a wish list, and it's brilliant because it's for each plant it will say forest garden, what's it called? Performance rating out of 5, I think it is. So I kind of made a list of all my favourite plants that I wanted, and then I kind of figured out how much money I had and what I could get hold of, and that kind of reduced the number of plants on my plant wish list. 2 really good websites are Plants for a Future and then RHS Plant Finder with a native filter, so you can filter the native plants, so to find native plants which should be suitable for a forest garden. So always be thinking about native plants. And then finally, pictures. Pictures are actually really good at the beginning stage. Pictures of the plants that you're interested in, pictures of features that you want, pictures of polytunnels, pictures of seating, pictures of arbours, pictures of hedges. Collect all of them, put them all up on the wall, and I've used Pinterest for clients as well. It's actually a really nice resource because you can gather things into different galleries or whatever they call them. I don't know. So measuring techniques. Going to finish up with measuring techniques. I've gone massively over. Sorry about that, everybody. It's more than I thought. I'll whiz through this. Direct line just means measuring. Measuring techniques. Use measuring. Always measure your garden. Don't rely upon an Ordnance Survey map or a satellite photograph. Always measure physically, because maps aren't accurate. Generally, they're not that accurate. Generally, there are inaccuracies in maps. So I use a surveyor's tape and measure. So measure the house first. The house generally has more right angles in it and more straight lines, and then you measure from the house because generally the house is fixed. So measure the house first. Direct line is a measurement from point A to point B, and that's it. So the running dimension measurement is when you have 2 points and then you measure from one point and you add the measurements, and this is useful for features on a house, so you're not having to say it's 1 meter to here and then a half a meter to here and then a half a meter to there. You add the the dimensions together, and then you end up, in this example, you'll have from point I to the window is 2 meters, and then from point I to the other side of the window is 3 meters, and then from point I to the door is 5 meters, and so on and so forth. Triangulation. Now I have used trigonometry to calculate angles. That gets a little bit technical. This is the simplest way that I found. As you can see in the paper plan on the plan here, the angles of the perimeter are all over the place. So the way to use triangulation is you take one measurement from a fixed point, point A, and that's 12 meters, and you draw a circle around it. But you won't know where on that circle point E is. You don't know that it's at that specific point. So to triangulate it, you measure from another point, point B, which is 16 meters. So then you put the two circles together, and that where they meet is where that point is. Yep. So you're using the angles. You're using the measurements from two separate points, and then triangulating those two separate points to find the third point. And finally, offsets. And then you use that same method to find the rest of the lengths. And then offsets is you've got an irregular shape, and you want to lay out a tape measure at right angles to the house, and then you will so you know where the house is, and you measure it's right angles to the house, so you know where to take a measurement from, and then using another tape measure at regular intervals, you measure up at regular intervals, and then you have the shape there, and then you plot that shape onto your map. Okay, blimey, that's the end of that. Forest garden takeaways. Observe. Yeah, take your time. Don't feel you have to get planting straight away. I think it's much more important to get a plan together and then plant than it is to just plant for the sheer hell of it, because you might well regret it, and it'll be more work for you. Make the big mistakes early, make the big mistakes on paper, and take your time. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much.